Hi, everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. I am joined on today's show by a UFO investigator with more than 35 years in the field. She is a trained remote viewer herself, is also an abductee, and known for her research into military abductions and deep underground military bases, among many other things. Welcome to the podcast, Melinda Leslie.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
It's good to have you, Melinda. People will never know the technical difficulties we've battled through to get to this point. So we can say right off the bat, if anyone wonders why Melinda's not in full 4K Ultra HD,
Yeah.
you're lucky we've got her here at all. But we've been doing tech troubleshooting and everything else in between. But we're here, Melinda.
Well, I think it's my tech ability because I'm a post boomer, so I'm right in between boomer and X, where it's like I have to do the technology, but I'm crap at it. How's that sound?
Well, I had to pull up some of my normal day job just to get you to that point. But we're here. And what we're going to do, Melinda, is kick off taking you back to your introduction to the UFO topic. You've kind of dated yourself a little bit there with the post-boomer stuff. So
yeah.
I'm going to take you back to what, 1989?
Guilty.
You got into the UFO topic, didn't you, back in 1989?
Yes.
So
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, oh goodness. Yeah. As you said, I've been in the field for almost 35 years now, at least 34, and as a researcher investigator. But it all started. It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to give the shorter version if I can. In 1989, with the breaking of the Bob Lazar story, a friend of mine stumbled upon a radio show called Billy Goodman's The Happening, broadcast out of Las Vegas. Lazar was not a known thing yet at all. It was brand new. He had confided in Gene Huff, a real estate broker friend of his. If you follow the story, you should know that. And he confided in him about the kind of difficulty he was having at work and not getting along with his supervisor, etc. And Gene had just apparently appraised the house for infamous, very famous researcher John Lear, and in Vegas. And so when Lazar shared what was going on at work and what he did, mostly just to kind of complain about it, is my understanding, with Gene said, look, I don't know anything about this, but this guy does. Like, I went and appraised his house, and he has a whole room that's nothing but like a UFO library, every wall covered with UFO stuff. And so he said, I think you should talk to him. And at first, Lazar was like, no, at the base and what I do, we think those people are completely nuts. I don't want to talk to anyone who's a UFO person. But eventually, whatever, he met Lear. Lear, like anyone, would say, can you prove this? And he says, well, I know when the test flights are. And he took Lear out, as well as Gene Huff, out to Highway 375 in Nevada and showed him the test flight, showed him the sightings coming out of the base. And Lear at the time was friends with the infamous Bill Cooper, took him out there. So these guys were going out there. Lear was a guest periodically on a radio show called Billy Goodman's The Happening. So he went on Billy's show and talked about, we're going out there and seeing this stuff. Now, at this point, no one had gone to George Knapp yet. That hadn't happened yet. So long story short, they go out on Highway 375. They see all this stuff. They start making multiple trips. That's when Lazar gets picked up for trying to enter the base from that side. And, and then they were told, they told him his job, when we said don't tell anyone about this, we didn't mean tell your friends and bring them out here and show them. Obviously we didn't mean that, and they got kind of rough and everything. And, but he was taking them out there and showing them this stuff, and they were having run-ins with the guards, et cetera, et cetera. And then Lear was going on Billy Goodman's The Happening. Well, my friend was into Native American studies. Right before all this, they had a bunch of Native American elders on this show. That's why she was listening to it. And all of a sudden, here's Lear telling this incredible story about this guy. And Lazar wasn't even using his name at that point. He was using his boss's name as a fictitious name. Anyway, so, and so they we're going out there seeing all this stuff, and here's Lear reporting on it. And then there was also Cooper coming on reporting on his going out there with him too. And so my friend listening to this said, let's go check this out. Now, at the time, I didn't really have an interest in the subject, just a passing interest. And my interest was kind of like ETs were higher beings. It was like through channeling, that kind of thing was my previous interest. I've been involved in the New Age and metaphysical field for a very long time, kind of my whole life, but real hardcore since like high school. And so in '89, that was kind of my mild interest. But she said, turn this on, listen to this radio program. It's fascinating. And here's, like I said, you'd go on and here's Lear telling these stories, who I later became friends with, long story short, but at the time, And so, and she said, let's go do this. And so what had happened is the show producer, a great lady who was a character we became friends with, but she said so many people were calling in going, where do we go on Highway 375? Isn't this BLM, Bureau of Land Management land? Can't we go out there? And so they decided to rent a bus at the station and say people can come, and they made a deal with one of the casinos in Vegas. We're going to meet in their parking lot. You can come get on this bus. They had a sign-up list. So many people called in to sign up. They immediately requested another bus from the, bus touring company. And they said, and we were too late to call in to get signed up. But my friend Terry, who turned me on to this, said, they were saying people can follow the buses and go out there. So we decided to do that. And we set off. We were living in Southern California. It's roughly 4.5 or 5 hours to Vegas, to meet up with everyone. But we got a late start, and we were like 2 hours behind when the buses were supposed to leave. By the time we got out there, traffic, whatever, And so we headed out there. Long story short, we had incredible sightings. And it was like inserting a key and turning it, because it started to bring forth for me all these past experiences, which ended up being abduction memories, that having all these sightings. That first trip, we sat up all night. The buses had to leave a little early from out at the viewing location on Highway 375, but there were like 40 cars, and everybody stayed, even though the buses left. And Billy Goodman, the host of the show, was there, and he said, call into the show tomorrow night and tell us what you saw, So we did, a lot of people did, but the next day we called in and said, hey, we were part of the people that stayed, and this is what happened. And we shared our sightings and everything that happened afterwards. And it was so mind-blowing. We took the whole trip again 2 weeks later, and then a month after that again. So in a 2-month period, in what would be like September and October of 1989, I had 3 back-to-back trips out to Area 51 from Southern California, again going to Vegas, and from Vegas is 2.5 hours out to Rachel, Nevada, and we had incredible sightings every time. And like I said, it was like inserting a key and turning it, because I went, wait a second, not only do UFOs absolutely exist, but they're flying in and out of a known top secret base. The sheriff was pulling up next to us. 2 sheriff's vehicles were there with us. And we're like talking to them as we're seeing this stuff, going, oh, you see this often? They look at us and go, yeah, every night, like it was no big deal for the local sheriffs to them to see that. White Bronco, the Wackenhut security for the base, was driving all over, kept driving past us. There were helicopters, military helicopters coming over us, hovering and going out to the base constantly. And then we were having these amazing sightings. And it was like, okay, all these paradigm changes overnight. UFOs are real. What we saw, because there was a little bit of a cloud coverage, and they were dropping out of the clouds and doing like the falling leaf pattern, and then shooting behind the hills, or shooting up from behind the hills, stopping like on a dime, like this, going like this, shooting over here, stopping, and then shooting straight up. And we're like going, okay, this defies physics as we know it clearly, and then it would hover and then shoot off again. It's like, this defies physics as we know it. The government's obviously involved. Everybody in the town, sheriff, everybody knows about it. There's a government involvement, and so all of a sudden, like I said, these major belief systems overnight. Not only was it absolutely real, but it defied physics, and the government had full knowledge of it. So that was like, okay, blinders off, So, and it was so mind blowing so that's why we took 3 back-to-back trips in a 2-month period, because we had to go out. It's like you need your fix, like, I need to get out there and see this again. Okay, so here we go. So just it was mind-blowing. And I met famous researcher Bill Hamilton out there, and other researchers. And Bill was putting on monthly lectures for MUFON Los Angeles, for MUFON in California, Mutual UFO Network. And I started going to those monthly meetings, etc. So that was my jump-in point for becoming a researcher, investigator in the field, going to lectures, going to conferences, and anyways, and also starting to learn about my own personal abductions, because, as I said, having all those amazing sightings was like inserting a key and turning it and unlocked something. I started to have memories come forward, which started me investigating, self-investigating. And Bill Hamilton and some other people that I met out there and shortly thereafter introduced me to this incredible therapist named Dr. Deborah Troncalli, who worked with abductees and was amazing. She was part of the whole MIT study thing, and she was part of all that, and with all those initial researchers. And I ended up meeting those researchers through her, and ended up becoming very good friends with Bud Hopkins and Dave Jacobs and John Mack and John Carpenter and Leo Sprinkle and blah 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 blah. And it all started with myself investigating, and then someone saying, you need to talk to this lady, and get some regressions and stuff. And I had a lot of conscious memory. I was having experiences with other people, so I had witnesses. And so that started me on that whole path, and I had my involvement in doing UFO investigation and my self-investigation into abductions, which eventually led to I was leading support groups for years. And long story short, doing that even with some other people that we were leading them together, and I did that for years, and became very involved in the whole alien abduction subject as a researcher. But also then in '93 realized I was having covert human experiences, and started to say, what's going on with this? Does anyone else have this? Only to learn that a lot of people were having it, and a lot of other abductees I knew were having it. And so that started me investigating the covert human involvement, which you and I refer to as MILABs or MILABs, which is just an acronym for military, for MIL for military, and AB for abduction. So it means military abduction. And it's just a covert human involvement in extraterrestrial abduction experiences. And the bottom line with that over all the years, because I still do it very actively, one might say even aggressively, research it, and work with so many people, hundreds that have had that happen. And it's because the alien abductions are absolutely real, that these guys have an interest in the abductees. And now it would make sense to most people following the disclosure field very closely right now, and into the fact that they're interested in the abductees' abilities, to interact
Melinda,
with the ETs.
let me dive in there, because you've
Okay.
covered a lot of bullet points that we're going to get to.
I think poor Andy's going, wait a second, leave me some questions to ask, man. I promised you wouldn't wind me up, and I'd just take up the whole time like Mr. Cameron.
Mr. Cameron, Mr. Bassett.
Yeah. By the way, who are dear friends of mine, so they know I do that. I pick on them out of love.
Listen, yes, you've picked up a few things there. Let me take you back first. So 1989, you've covered well your introduction to the topic through the whole Lazar story coming out. But you mentioned that took you back and seemed to unlock something, which is quite common. A lot of folks say that they don't realize they've had experiences going back to childhood until later in life, when something happens, a sighting, an experience, an event, or whatever it may be. So take us back to those childhood experiences and what was happening around those.
Yeah. Oh goodness. One of my first memories. Now, in '89, not only was I remembering past things, but I started to have current stuff happen. So I was having new experiences. But going back to one of the ones I remembered as a child, my grandmother had a house in Yucca Valley, California, in the California desert, by Giant Rock, infamous Landers, California. That's where her house was, just a couple miles from Giant Rock. And that's very famous in the UFO lore, by the way, if people are unfamiliar. And for Van Tassel and the Integratron and all those original sightings, and then the first UFO conference that ever existed were out there in the 50s, and 60s. Anyway, so my grandmother wasn't into any of that, though. She thought those people were kind of nuts. But that is where that happened. And so I'm out at her place, and one of my earliest memories, as an example, I put down for a nap. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and I think my cousins might have been out there too. But everyone was going to go into town, I think maybe to see a movie or something. But being that I was like 5, I was put down for a nap, and one adult, of course, stayed behind. My grandmother had a little, kind of like a little homestead, had a great room before such a thing existed, but like, kitchen, living room as one, and then a little separate bedroom, and then a great big walk-in pantry, because town was like a half hour away, so she stocked up. And so I was put down in the living room, in the bedroom, on her bed, and adult, I can't remember exactly who, but they stayed behind and were sitting on the couch reading while I'm put down for a nap. And what I always remembered initially in my whole life was that little kids came to the bedroom window and wanted me to go out and play with them. Well, I should emphasize here that my grandmother lived in the middle of the desert. And at the time, the closest neighbor was about 100 yards away, was an old guy with 2 mules in his yard and like a, pickup truck on cinder blocks, give you the idea, I mean, truly, that's, desert rat. And the next closest neighbor to them was like a mile away. And this date was like 102 out, really hot, extremely hot. And I put down for this nap, like I said. And what I remember is little kids came to the bedroom window and wanted me to go play with them. And that I had snuck out past the adult who'd fallen asleep on the couch and went outside and played with these kids. And so when everybody came home from the movies and everything, and that I don't, that's how I kind of remembered the experience, and that maybe I went back in, crawled back into bed or something, okay. So that was always my memory, okay, until all of a sudden having all these sightings, and all of a sudden, so, and like I said, everyone came back from the movies and said, oh, you had a nice nap. And I said, I went out and played with little kids. And they go, and they look to the adult and go, whoever was left behind, I don't remember who it was, but, they go, no, she was sleeping the whole time. Well, I remembered that that person fallen asleep on the couch, and I'd gone out and played with these kids. But now I know that that's what you call a screen memory, because what had actually happened after having all these sightings was I was having dreams at night, but recalling that whole experience. And it wasn't little kids at the bedroom window, it was gray aliens. And I was taken out and then brought back. And I received a little scoop mark on my leg in that experience that I still have. It's below my knee. And that anyways, that I had received at that time, this little scoop mark. And actually, I take that back. That was a later experience, not that experience. That was a later experience when I was like 12. So let's go back, or 11 or 12. Okay, so this experience was, I was taken out, and I remembered that, and I didn't need regression. It came out in a dream that it was grays and everything. And I said, well, this is crazy, because I thought it was because I just had all these sightings, that it was like making me think, okay, I've had these experiences. And maybe, maybe I haven't, maybe I'm just having these bizarre dreams because I just had some very real, incredible UFO sightings, and that I was having these weird dreams. But when I think back now with everything I know, I'm left going, no, that was probably an experience, probably was. And then jumping ahead to when I was 12, there were more, there were others. But the time when I was 12, again, out at my grandmother's place, but this time at staying a little motel, which is where we usually stayed, because my grandmother only had the one bed, so we weren't staying there. We would stay in Yucca Valley at the what's called the Yucca Inn. The building is still there for this hotel. It's part of a travel lodge property, and it's in the back, and it's really funky and run down looking now, but it was a really cute motel once upon a time. But anyway, so staying there, my family was going to do a day picnic to Joshua Tree National Monument, which is like a gardens and, Joshua trees. And so they were going to go there and do this picnic. And again, a really hot day. And I wasn't feeling good. I was like sick to my stomach. So I said, and I was 11 or 12, I think it's about 12. And so at that age, I was old enough to leave alone, no problem. And they said, well, you stay here. I said, go have a good time. I'm good. And they said, well, if you get feeling better, they had a pool, at the motel, really nice one. And they said, and the pool had like a lifeguard. So they said, we'll let them know at the hotel that you're here by yourself, but go in the pool if you need to. They were taking a picnic lunch. They unpacked stuff for me and left it there for me. It says, if you get hungry, eat. And so I laid down. And back then there was no such thing as a non-smoking room, so the room stunk. And I laid down hoping to sleep, but the room stunk really bad. There was a window-mounted air conditioning unit. It was really loud. It was like, yeah, I was like, ah. And so between that rattling and the room stinking, I'm like, I'm miserable. I'm sick to my stomach. I need some fresh air. So I went outside, walked around. I remember kind of just walking out to the street and down it and coming back. And when I came back, it was suddenly getting dark. And my family came home and they said, oh, did you go swimming? Did you haven't eaten your food, And I said, no, I tried to sleep and I couldn't sleep. So I went for a walk and they said, well, you must have fallen asleep. We've been gone all day. And I'm like, no, because I was 12, I had a good sense of time. I figured they'd been gone for like an hour. I said, no, you guys have gone like an hour, 2 max. But I said I could never sleep. I went outside, took a little walk, came back, and here you guys are. I think I even went in the restaurant. I think that's why I went back. I had to use the restroom. And they came back when I was in the restroom. And they said, well, you must have fallen asleep because we've been gone like 6 hours. We went, we did our hiking, we did a picnic. Coming back, it was hot, so we got ice cream, whatever. And they're like, we've been gone all day. See, it's getting dark. It's dark outside now. And I'm like, no, wait, no, that made no sense. I figured they'd been gone like an hour, And they said, Melinda, you must have fallen asleep. I said, I wish. I feel like crap. I wish I'd slept, And they said, well, you must have fallen asleep. So then, again, those dreams after I had all those sightings, 1989, and I started to have this whole dream about that experience. But when I went outside and went walking, I walked up over a hill. Well, now there's some houses there, but back then there wasn't. I've done some research to kind of find out back then. And I walked over a little rise and into kind of like over a little hill and then down, and there was a landed craft. And there was a craft, a landed one with grays around it. And I was compelled to like walk up to it, and had an experience. And that's when I got the scoop mark. So that's that experience. I combined the two for a second there, but to this day, I have that little scoop mark that I got in that experience. And they took me on board. I had an exam. I don't remember going anywhere other than just being on board. And then releasing me and my walking back to the hotel, going in the bathroom. And that's when everybody showed up. So, and I had significant missing time. I mean, there's no way to account for that whole day. And to this day, I have a little time mark on my leg. Now I've got others from other experiences, but that one was from that. But so, and when I first went to Dr. Deborah Troncala, I went to her saying, look, I don't think this is real. I think I'm losing my mind. She's a full-fledged doctor of psychology, a psychotherapist. And she goes, well, maybe, but let's see, And then I started to work with her, and it turned out, that I wasn't losing my mind. I was just a real typical abductee, But it took getting regressions with her and working with her, and over the years, unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she was a tremendous help to me. Now I work with Yvonne Smith with CERO, Close Encounter Resource Organization, and her support group, and I've been working with Yvonne for years. I've also been regressed by the late Bill Hamilton, and I was regressed by Barbara Lamb, who thankfully is still with us.
On
Okay,
those
thank you.
experiences, Melinda, the
Yes.
abduction phenomenon can split a lot of people in the UFO topic, even people who are really vested into it, just because it's such an incredible claim. I'm really proud this podcast got a very broad audience. There are people who are all in on everything. I've got people who are very skeptical about every aspect of the UFO topic, to the point some of them listening almost aren't into the topic because of it, but there's something that fascinates them about it. But I think they're right to question everything. For you, you actually said, when you talked about your first experience, you said it was probably, I think I've got, yeah, you said it was probably an experience. I'll take that little cough out, don't worry.
Thank you.
So you said it was probably an experience. Now, then you've mentioned the second experience. There were others, the regression that you've had over the years. And regression's one of those things that some people put a lot of stock into, others not so much, but that's just a UFO topic.
Well,
But
I remember, well, for what's worth, I remember most of my experiences consciously. I've had a lifetime of experiences.
Yeah.
So you can't base it on what I've just shared with you, because yes, those came up after those signs, but then I started to have current real-time experiences and was aware of it. Friends, I'll give a quick example. That's a roommate of mine. Okay, one night we're having a discussion. I had two roommates at the time. I was an office manager in a retail clothing store at the time, and I had a roommate named Gail and another one named Scott. Scott was away on business that particular weekend, and so it's Gail and I. I had to work the next morning, and Gail was going through kind of a messy divorce. That's one of the reasons she was our roommate. She was separated from her husband. And so Gail was confiding something in me that night, and I said, I need to get to bed. I have a project due at work in the morning, and I want to get to bed at 10 because I have to go to work at like 8 in the morning. Okay. We got talking, and we ended up talking till like midnight. And I was helping her through something. Okay. I went to bed that night going, oh, shoot, I got to set my alarm. And if I set it, I'll get exactly 6 hours of sleep if I go to bed right now. So I sat on my bed. I got ready for bed. Sat there, sat my alarm, had the light on next to me, covers pulled up over my legs. And again, sat my alarm and did a quick little meditation, like just to make sure I'd fall asleep right away. Back then, I wouldn't have taken a sleeping aid or whatever. I would just, do some little deep breathing or something. So I did that. I reached for the light, and I've done it 1,000 times. So it was like at that point in my life, no big deal. I reached for the light, and I'm double checking the alarm. I just set the alarm because I want to make sure if I relax, I didn't forget to, what. Okay, so then I reached for the light, and I double checked the alarm. I'm one of those people back then, especially with jobs where you had to be there at a certain time, very paranoid about being late or whatever. So looked at it and went, what? And I just said it. I knew exactly what time it was. Her and I discussed the time, and suddenly it was like 2.5 hours later. There's no way I was sitting on my bed for 2.5 hours. And I remember we didn't have cell phones back then, but I was checking other clocks in the room, going, is this correct? Could this be wrong? So I had set the alarm. I knew exactly what time it was, and suddenly it was 2.5 hours later, and that made no sense. And I thought, what have I done for 2.5 hours? I said, Linda, something happened. It's 2.5 hours later. You weren't sitting on your bed for 2.5 hours. You're now only going to get 4 hours of sleep or less. And I've had this project due at work in the morning. I wanted to get in there early and work on this thing. And I couldn't get this image out of my head as I sat there of 3 gray aliens standing next to the bed. And one of them was holding a device. Finally, I calmed myself down. I fell asleep. My alarm goes off 4 hours later, waking the dead. I crawl into work. We've all done it before. Fake it until you make it, Go through work. Okay. Came home that night, and Gail's in the kitchen making dinner, and I started to make myself dinner. And she goes, what happened to you last night? I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, she couldn't sleep. She sat up reading after our discussion. And she said she kept hearing noises downstairs. And so she went downstairs to see what was going on. We lived in a 2-story townhouse in Tustin, California, for those familiar with the area. And so she went downstairs, nothing there. She knew Scott was out of town. I had already complained about, I have to get to bed right away. I'm only going to get 6 hours of sleep, you know. And then, so she didn't hear anything. She comes back up. We had a big gap under our bedroom doors. We had like Berber carpeting, but at one time there was like plush or something. So she knocks on my bedroom door and there's no answer. And she sees the light on, so she knows my light is on. It's like 3 a.m. Knocks again, no answer. Pounds on the door, no answer. I have a tiny little bedroom at that townhouse. She goes into my room. I'm not there. During my missing time, she went in my room and I wasn't there. Yet my light was on. It's like 3 a.m. I'm not there. She goes downstairs, looks for me, looks all over the place. I'm not there. Opens up the front door. We had a carport. We all had assigned spaces, but we would the 3 of us roommates would alternate to get the space. So here's Gail going in my room. I'm not there. Goes downstairs. I'm not there. Goes outside. My car is in the carport. It was my week to have the carport. And I was in front at the door. And she goes, your car was there. I know you didn't drive anywhere. So she said, at that point, you know, she couldn't find me in my room. And then she goes back into her room, sits, but with her door open to the hallway, wondering where am I at 3 a.m? I always said I got to work early in the morning. She's like, this is crazy. Is something wrong? You know? And so, and we didn't have cell phones or anything, so there was nothing to call, you know? So she has the door open to the hallway, hoping she's going to hear me walk inside the front door downstairs. And her room is right at the top of the stairs. And then the base of the stairs is the front door. And so she's hoping she's going to hear me come. And all of a sudden, there's a flash of light in the hallway. So there's this flash of light. And she looks to the hallway expecting that maybe she's going to see me and she just didn't hear me come in. Standing in the hallway she's fully conscious, sitting in bed. She was sitting in bed reading. She said it was a gray alien. It stood in the hallway, came into her room, looked right at her. Now, after going in my room, after I wasn't there, she closed the door because she thought, well, I don't want Melinda to think I went in her room when she wasn't here, you know. And she said the gray came in, looked right at her, and walked through my closed bedroom door like a knife through butter. And she said the gray, you know, went into my room through the door as if the door wasn't there. So here she went in my room when I was gone during missing time, fully conscious, sitting on her bed reading, sees a gray in the hallway. When she sees a flash of light, expecting to see me, she looks at the hallway. There's a gray. It walks through my closed door as if like a knife through butter, as if my door wasn't there. And she saw it go in my room. And she had read, it came out 2 or 3 years before that, was Communion by Whitley Strieber. And she actually owned it. And she said, Melinda, are you having experiences like that guy? And I had not read the book. I had heard of it at that point. But she goes, Melinda, I have that book. I've read it twice. I think you're having experiences like that guy. And so here, you know, she was awake, fully conscious, seeing a gray in the hallway, seeing it go through my door, and going in my room during my missing time while I was gone. So she witnessed that experience. Years later, she had, not years, actually, the next year, she had 2 daughters living with her ex. 14-year-old came to live with us briefly. When the 14-year-old was there with her mom, they witnessed repeated experiences happening to me, including being woken up during the night, and I'll quote them, by military men in your bedroom, giving you orders, you crying and pleading, no, 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 I don't want to. And she said they clearly sounded like military, and it was the middle of the night, and this happened more than once. So they were also witnessing my MILAB experiences. It just so turned out I wasn't aware I was having the MILABs till 1993. I was roommates with them in 1990-91. And these experiences that they witnessed happened in like 91, that they were witnessing military men in my room, and did not tell me till years later when they found out I was researching that they said, by the way, when we were roommates with you, we witnessed this stuff. And I said, why didn't you tell me back then? Well, they said you were having such a hard time with your alien abduction experiences, because I was initially. They said you were having such a hard time with it that we thought saying that there were military guys in your room would be too much for you. And they said, so we didn't say anything. And the fact you never brought it up either told us either you didn't want to talk about it at all, or you didn't know what was going on. And I said, well, I did not know till 93. And in 93, August and November of 1993, I had 2 military experiences back to back. And that's what started that whole thing. But I did not know back in 90-91, I was having those experiences. And I was just coming to terms with my ET ones. And I said, you're probably right. Back then, that would have been a bit much for me to handle. And they said that's why we didn't say anything, but they were witnessing that. But they witnessed multiple of my ET experiences too. And that particular time, Gail went in my room. So, and I have other times when I've been taken with other people who also remember the experience, both the ET experiences and the covert human ones. So I have other abductees who remember. I have other forms of physical evidence. I have pictures galore of scoop marks, burn marks on me, burn marks, scoop marks, odd bruising, needle marks, weird needle mark patterns over the years, because as I got into the research, whenever I had anything to happen to me, I was trying to document it. And I was encouraged back then by Dr. Deborah Troncalli and by Bud Hopkins and everybody else to document what was going on with me. In fact, at one time, Dr. Troncalli said I was her best evidence case, and she worked with hundreds of people with experiences. And she said, you're my best evidence case. You have more evidence. But I was making a point to, so many abductees get evidence, or they have something happen, they don't take the photo, or they keep a sample for a while and then eventually throw it out. In fact, there's almost a thought amongst abductees that there might be some kind of programming or something to delete your evidence, to not keep it. It's really weird because people will for a while and then they don't, or they don't all, from the beginning. And so, and in talking to Yvonne Smith over the years, it's like twisting people's arms to get them to save your evidence, like take photos, darn it. If you have a witness, record them saying the experience, or at least write it down and have them sign it, or, I mean, abductees are horrible investigators of their own experiences, and because I think they're trying to block it. Like the tendency is to block it and to repress it, and when you document your evidence, then that's that double-edged sword of, oh my God, it happened. You're like, this is real, and so I think it's natural for people to be their own worst enemy when it comes to that stuff. But I made a point, and I was encouraged by other researchers to document and keep evidence. No, I didn't always. There's things I kicked myself years later for not doing. I totally kicked myself for not always doing it. Even though I was good. But going back to so and I hear people. So when people are skeptical about it, it's like, look, I didn't just say, oh, I'm an abductee. It took years of investigation. It took a lot of memory recall. It took a lot of evidence. It took a lot of witnesses. There's times now, if I go into a moment of doubt, I go back to some of those times when I've had witnesses to my experiences, or people who are taken with me who also remembered. I mean, that same year, 91, not only did I have all the stuff, Gail and Angie, her daughter, were witnessing, and Gail going to my room and all those experiences and physical evidence, but I was taken with my first group abduction, which I've had many now, mass abduction, was with my friend Steve and Mike.
I don't want to go too far, Melinda, right? Let me come in, because we're going to get too far. Yeah,
absolutely.
Have a drink.
Melinda's taking mental note. Let Andy ask questions.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll just shut you up. Don't worry. I'll jump.
Okay, good.
No, what I was asking before, when I was saying to you about, you used the word probably, because what I wondered was, people are always skeptical in regression and going back. It's very common, though, in the UFO topic, for people to not realize till later they'd had an experience when they were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find they had stopped at all? Because you did have, obviously, you didn't have the memory of it until you were seeing those things around the late 80s, early 90s, or then those experiences started back up. Was there a time, even in those regressions and looking back, do you know what? For these 3, 4, 5, 10 years, I had no experiences and they stopped? Or was it something that was always happening that you later found out?
I don't remember what I don't remember, so,
yeah.
But it seems that the evidence and recall is pretty consistent over time. So I can't really say it ever stopped until within like the last 6 years.
Okay.
Which I think has something to do with menopause, and but not completely. In fact, there was something about a month ago that caused me to think maybe I had another experience for the first time in 6 years. I'm not completely certain, but there was some evidence, and so I'm like, did I just have something for the first time in 6 years? I might have. But regardless, I knew 6 and 7 years ago I had 2 experiences that I'm certain about and had lots of physical evidence for. So, but again, I thought it probably stopped because of menopause and because of my maybe not being viable, that kind of thing. And because I've had a lot of that taken. But again, I want to stress to everyone, this didn't come to me easily. It was because of the physical evidence and witnesses that made me go, okay, this is happening, and I'm glad I was documenting that, and because it helped me wrap my head around it over the years, to go, okay, I've been taken so many times with other people who also recall the experience, and it's like I'm not the only one remembering it; they are. And every detail, like when I was taken with Mike and Steve while driving, that was in 91, driving together in a road trip, and the 3 of us were taken from the car, and suddenly they had complete conscious memory of it, not just me, and so those things make me go, okay, this really happened. And then when I started having so much of the covert human stuff and the evidence for them, it was such evidence for my ET experiences, because they were only interested. That was my point. I brought that up earlier.
Yeah.
Their involvement is because the ET experiences are real. They want to know the covert human ones. Yeah. They want to know what we know. They want to know what we've seen. Have we flown and operated a ship? Do we do it with our consciousness? That's what they want to know. They want to know, do we know about alien agenda and motives? Why are they here? What are they doing? What's going on? They want to know if we're able to communicate with them. If you are able to communicate and fly a ship, these guys might recruit you, and they have some people.
Take us back, though, Melinda, to military abductions. Just go back over that. Let's talk about military abductions, the MILABs, MILAB stuff, because this is something that, especially to folks newer to the UFO conversation, they might not be familiar with. So just go back over what's the difference again between your abduction and your military abduction, and then take us through your kind of early experiences with those, but also your investigations.
Well, yeah. With my own experience with it, besides the things I had had earlier that now I know in detail, that my roommates were witnessing stuff and were woken up in the night by what they said sounded like military guys in my bedroom giving me orders, and my crying and pleading no, and they said it happened more than once. But going back to 93, when the first thing that I remembered happening was I'm awoken in my bed in my apartment then in Corona Del Mar, California, a little beach community, Southern California. And there's two guys in camouflage next to the bed with like a stretcher. And one of them put this oily substance in my mouth. He had like a dropper in like a little bottle, and he like had like leather gloves on and parted my lips and put this in there. And it was really thick and oily and kind of bitter is what I remembered. And then obviously being drugged, and then he put me on the stretcher. Anyways, it's a very detailed experience, but I had an experience, like I said, in August of 93 and November of 93. One of those, and both times I was taken from my apartment there in Corona Del Mar, California. And one of those was, it's, in fact, I think it is the first one that I remember, was very personal experience of, I believe that they performed an abortion procedure on me. I have extensive memory about it. And I also worked with Dr. Deborah Troncalli on a number of regressions over it as well, but I had extensive conscious memory. And that I was taken to an underground base in a clean room hazmat style facility with a bunch of guys in clean suits. I had an abortion type procedure that I later had an expert tell me, when described to them, an expert in doing such kind of procedures tell me that it was an early term and usually only happens when the fetus isn't viable and isn't formed. So I think what had happened is I probably had, and at that time I was having a lot of ET experiences and a lot of ovum being taken and presentations with hybrids and that kind of thing. So I'm thinking I probably had a hybrid fetus that wasn't formed, and they performed this early abortion procedure on me because it didn't take. And at the end of the experience, in this underground base having that happen, I was handed back to ETs, and I was cleaned up and went through a healing process at the hand of the ETs who were also involved in the experience. So I think the military guys were allowed to have this fetus that was not viable. And by the way, you guys, I was not pregnant at the time. I had not had that documented. I've had a lot of people question me extensively about what I was going through right before this happened, and I may have been pregnant and wasn't aware of it. But like I said, it was a hybrid fetus, and then when I had the experience at the end in the underground base, I was handed back to ETs. They cleaned me up, healed me, brought me back. I later had someone question me about the healing process afterwards, and it seemed like I went through all the healing that you would go through if you had had that procedure, but in like half the time it would normally take, or even less than that. Like I healed from it pretty quick, but my body did go through a bunch afterwards. And then that was in August of 93. In November of 93, I had an experience of a different nature, but again, taken from where I live, taken to another underground base, and specifically like interrogated about some ET technology that I had seen. And I was asked to draw what I had seen, and I was kind of given a post-it note suggestion that if I ever saw that again, or like almost given like an assignment, in your next abduction, we want you to find this and find out more about it. And that was completely human, no ETs involved in that experience, but it was this interrogation, and it was a very, very difficult experience because there was a lot of intimidation and I was a little bit beat up and stuff. It was a pretty rough experience. But in that one, that was completely human. But it was because they wanted this information about this ET technology. And anyways, and I had extensive bruising and stuff on my body afterwards. Took lots of pictures of that, needle marks, bruising, etc. Same with the other experience. Although this one I had more because it was more physical than the other one. And anyway, so those were those two experiences. And that was the beginning of realizing, okay, I'm having that happen. And at the same time, I was having extensive phone stuff go on, phone harassment, black helicopter harassment. I would have people over at my place and the black helicopters would hover over the roof and I had witnesses. My neighbor across the street made this comment one day. I was living in Del Mar, California. Neighbor across the street goes, God, it's like we live in LA or something. And military helicopters are constantly trying to land on our roof. Which for the area we were nowhere near anything like that. It didn't make any sense. Even if the police would go over the area with a spotlight, they're at 700 feet, and yet these things would be like lower. And one day, this black helicopter goes by, hovers out above my yard over the house in front of me. He's more like over the street. He's a little bit further out, but it's a big like what do you call it, like a Huey or whatever. The doors on the side are open. There's a guy crouched down in the doorway with I think a camera, and it was like sunset. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting in the background. The doors on the other side were open, so you could see the sunset through both open doors on the body. But this guy's crouched down in,
Flick your mic up.
What?
Your mic.
Oh,
your mic.
Sorry, I hit it. Sorry. But I guess I hit it or something. But here he's crouched down the doorway, taking my picture, and like I said, my neighbor across the street complained as well, like we quote, live in LA and helicopters try to land on our roof. It was crazy. And one time I was in a online chat group back then. That's, what kind of existed back then. And I was in this chat room with some other abductees, and I had a helicopter harassment, and the other abductees in the chat were like, we can hear that. Because I guess, so it's like, and they go, are you having a helicopter thing? And I went outside and I looked at it and I went back in and described it. And they said, is it still there? And I kept going outside and looking again, go, yeah, it's still there. And I'd come back in and describe it some more. And then I went out and finally it flew off. But for the longest time, it was hovering right over my place while I'm on this group, and so that kind of stuff was just crazy. I was having so much happen. I was at Dr. Deborah Trincali's office in Newport Beach, and she at one time had a third-story office. Well, she had one on one side of the building, and we had helicopters out of there. But the other side of the building was right over. It was via Lido Street in Newport Beach, and on the other side were like townhouses and another office building. And it wasn't that wide. And there's more than once I'm in regression, and here comes a black helicopter hovering right outside the window with equipment and stuff on it, and she'd have to bring me out of the regression. And we'd look and see this helicopter. It would have a boom mic and and a radar dish, and God only knows on it. And we're like going, they're hovering right outside the window, obviously probably recording the regression. I'm like, but it was blatant. And what is that for? That's harassment, intimidation, and it was intimidating her and me at the same time. And then at one time she had her office broken into, and she worked with a lot of abductees. Whoever came in, the only thing they were looking for was abduction related files. And the only things that were taken were a few of the MILAB cases, the people like that. And some of those files were removed. So whoever went into her office went looking specifically for those and took those. And, and again, the helicopter right outside. So, and that stuff was happening because of my ET experiences, because they wanted to know about the technology I saw, and they wanted to know about did I have that consciousness or interaction with the ETs, and what can I tell them about alien motives and alien agenda and that kind of stuff. And I wasn't alone. Like I said, I started to research other cases and realize a lot of people were having this happen and still do.
Melinda, can you talk about
Yes.
the actual technology in the military abductions? Are they using reverse engineered alien technology to carry out these abductions?
Yes and no. Is all of it done that way? No. Are some of them done that way? Yes. Can I say that they're using some of that? Yes. One experience in particular, in a military abduction, no joke, I would none of this. I'm not kidding on all this. I everyone can tell that. I was flown on a triangle, big black triangle. That was clearly ours, but clearly had two different modes of travel very precisely. I was removed from my apartment at the time, taken to a military base where this thing was parked. I was on a stretcher and loaded on it, and I say it had like a bunk bed in the back corner, like you would on a like a small sailboat. You know, if you're on a sailboat that has those bunks that do this in the front nose, you know, okay, the bow, I guess you call it, right? But it had that. But it was more like just a thing suspended by straps. And they had me on a stretcher and they put me in there. This thing takes off vertically like a Harrier, you know, goes up, thrust forward. Was definitely a big black triangle, because how do I know that? When they had me on the stretcher on the ground outside, I looked at it. And as they walked me around, I'm seeing it from laying on the stretcher, but I'm making a point to try to take it all in. And then they walk up this ramp going up to it. And so the whole time I had a good look, and I had a good look going through the door of the ramp, you know, slanted like this, and the components of the door going in, which were like on a plane, you know, when the door comes in and slides it, you know, except for in this case, I think it was kind of similar, but went more like a pocket door, like it went in between panels, as opposed to plane where they kind of bring it in, you know. I think this,
Yeah.
And but anyways, you know, clearly, I saw this and the components, and it wasn't all pretty like a plane, because there weren't like panels on the inside. Stuff was exposed, you know, so you could see wiring and tubing and whatnot. And
so do you mean like inside the craft looked like an office when it's being built? You could see before they put all the nice wall and stuff up. You can see wires.
No, like if you took the inside panels out of a plane, you know, like
right. Okay.
I mean, this, it was clearly, you know, a piece of military tech, and had only exactly what it needed to for its functioning, you know.
Sure.
And it was kind of a graphite matte black on the outside. And then when they brought me in, I got a good look. I have drawings. I've done detailed drawings of all this. And the way the windows were around the corner, these individual little windows that were like beveled, and, you know, I remember all that, and the control panel. And the guys flying it were wearing helmets and flight suits that reminded me of the old like Mercury astronaut, like the silver, you know. That's kind of like what they kind of look like. Pressurized suits, whatever. But I was just under blankets, and they drugged me heavily out on the stretcher before carrying me in, and I was still conscious at the point this thing takes off, thrusts forward, and then all of a sudden it switches to a different mode of travel, where suddenly there was extreme pressure, and then a feeling of weightlessness, clearly. And but I was strapped down on this thing. But I could tell, and a really intense smell of, like, if I say like, well, it's a U.S. thing, but sparklers on the 4th of July, like ozone smell, and that kind of like burnt electrical and ozone smell, very, very intense. When it switched to this other mode of travel that then was like suspended, and it had originally taken off like this and thrust forward. So it felt like, I mean, I've never been on a Harrier jet, but I've been close to them, seeing them take off, and I go, well, this must be what that feels like. And then all of a sudden it became this other mode of travel. Something else, definitely changed about it. And eventually I was brought down, left in a hangar. There was a miscommunication screw up in this experience where there was apparently like guys were supposed to be there when I was left in this hangar, and they weren't there. And for a moment I was by myself in this hangar, which was an underground base. The end of the hangar was open to like desert night sky, and the other end went back into a hill. And eventually guys showed up and escorted me out of there, but it was obvious that there had been some kind of miscommunication thing. Either that or it was meant to be confusing for me, but it really seemed like there was some kind of miscommunication timing thing that had been thrown off. But then when these guys did escort me out, they escorted me out into a tunnel system, and we ended up going into another series of rooms off of this tunnel system. And that actually was the same experience when I was interrogated about technology. That was that same experience.
So with these abductions, you've got the military performing abductions because they want information from abductees who
Yes.
are also being abducted by ETs, non-human intelligence.
Yes.
Why do you think that separation is? For a lot of folks in the UFO topic, there is a narrative that the US government, the militaries around the world are in contact with ET and they're working together.
Absolutely.
Why are they doing this so separately then?
Because they may not be getting all the information they need. It could be a very one-sided relationship on the part of the ETs. It could be very compartmentalized. So the part that's asking abductees may not know what the part that are interacting with the ETs directly know. I've met so many government insider types over the years and have had compartmentalization explained to me upside down and sideways. It's amazing they're able to get anything done. The right hand, left hand are not talking to each other. It's to the point of almost like it's like I'm surprised they're able to do anything.
Yeah.
And so it could be the part that who's asking those questions may not know what the other people know, or the ETs aren't very forthcoming because it's a very restrained, very partial relationship. Or there's also multiple groups of ETs. And so it could be they're working with one group, but their questioning is about another group that they're not working with. It's like it all seems like an intelligence operation thing, and and so compartmentalized and so limited. And I think it speaks to the complications. I think a lot of it also involves corporate entities and what they know versus what the government guys know versus what the military guys know. It's like no one's sharing with each other. I think it's like everyone's trying to own their piece of it. And it just seems like there's just a complete communication breakdown at certain levels. Now, there's certain things that, that they are doing together. I mean, there's a lot of operations involved when they involve the abductees and pick them up and transport them. And I can tell you this, they have drugs, fear, intimidation, and hypnosis down to a science. Now, not perfect though, because the mind is pretty complex and you also have cellular memory and these things. So I think people can recall these things, but for as many MILABs are having those experiences, how many people were recalling stuff? Not that many. And it tends to be in bits and pieces. I've had to do extensive work for 35 years to recall and retain and I've also bothered to like interview my witnesses and whatnot, but I'm not alone. I mean, there are some really advanced MILAB cases that have stuff like me. In fact, I have, when I lecture and present on it, I have this sliding curve line for where people are at in their experience and what stuff has happened and whether they've been recruited into programs and used in psionics and blah, blah, blah. And anyways, this line goes like this. My experiences are right in the middle. And I didn't intend for that. I just said, well, these are what I'm getting in my reports and other cases I work with, and what they're having happen, what insiders are telling me, going along. And then you get into the super soldier stuff, which gets really complicated. But you go, wait a second, I land in the middle of that. I have lots of cases that are at the first couple of bars on that. They just started. They just have this. And then people who have this and this and this, and people like me, and then people who are really advanced cases who even been recruited into programs. And yeah. and I tend to only work with cases that have evidence. I don't just go, well, I have a story, No. I'm like, if I'm going to spend time interviewing you, you're an evidence case. And evidence means at the very least witnesses. Witnesses, maybe some form of physical evidence. Maybe you have photos and documentation of, maybe you have some medical reports. Maybe you have a police report.
Outside of your own experience, what's the best evidence you have seen from someone else?
For MILABs or alien abduction or UFOs in general? I'd have to think about that. Well, there's things that I like versus, everyone's idea of what is good evidence. People might say, government insider, really good evidence, a document, really good evidence, a police report, really good evidence, a medical report, and I've all those things. Okay. But there's two male cases of mine that I think are particularly good for this reason, because I like it. So it's subjective. It's what I think is good evidence.
Yeah.
One gentleman was having so much stuff happen, he put motion activated cameras in his home. He was also selling the home. And when he would have realtors come over or want to do a showing, he would take all the motion activated camera stuff down, because that would look suspicious to a buyer. Like, why do you have that? Is there a security problem?
Yeah.
Obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so one day realtors call him and say, we have someone that wants to see it. Can we come over this afternoon? And so he takes the cameras down, but he forgot one outside of his bedroom in a hallway. But the last minute he saw it and he remembered it. So he grabbed it and took it down. He threw it under his bed, but apparently it was still activated. So it's under his bed in his master bedroom. Now, the day before, God, this is complicated. I have to try and do this concisely. The day before that, or maybe 2 days before that, he had a motion activated camera in the yard. He had a MILAB event. The camera filmed the guys, according to him, filmed the guys in the yard, and they used some technology that did something to the wall of his house. Between his front door and a window is a big piece of wall, and he feels like they accessed it by creating a portal or an opening or displacing the wall in space and time with some kind of technology. He said the motion activated camera under a bush in his yard filmed the whole thing, got the guys and got them using this technology that it seemed to, the wall got really fuzzy and blurry and like something was being done to the wall. And he always thought that maybe they're able to access and enter that way without having to break down a front door or pick a bunch of locks or break a window or, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay, so he remembered the experience, heard them in the yard, knew he had the voice, the motion activated camera, had checked it and had watched it to see that it caught this. He took the memory card or the chip, whatever, out of it. But here's where he made a mistake. He took it out and he was going to hide it. He had a unit in his master bedroom on a table next to his bed of like little drawers that was like organizational and would maybe had mannery, like his man jewelry, watch, whatever in there, and change, maybe, in loose change. And so But his sister had called him that day, and he'd had a bunch of these experiences recently, and he was talking to her on the phone about it. And he said, I took the chip out. It's next to my bed. This is because later I said, did you ever talk about this on the phone? And he ended up remembering that he had. And they told his sister. Because the next day is when the realtors come and he takes the cameras down. And the one in the hallway he grabs and he throws it under his bed. Apparently, they came back, the military guys. He filmed one walking around in his bedroom from the camera under his master bed. So it catches the guy's feet from like the knees down. But luckily, he has a big, set into the wall, very modern fireplace unit with like black glass, where it's like flush with the white wall, you know. But it's technically it's a fireplace. Thank God, because the camera is filming under the bed, got the guy's feet from the knees down, but got his reflection behind him in the big black glass of the fireplace. Luckily, the angle was such that you see the guy go in the room. We had to do research. And I had to go to someone I know who's an insider to find out he had a certain kind of military shoe on made to be really quiet for like special forces use in for something like this when they want their feet not to be heard.
Yeah.
And they are camouflaged, but they're almost like a camouflage slipper, you know. Anyways, apparently this is a real thing. Like I did do research in this because we were trying to figure out what's going on with his shoes. And it was this kind of special camouflage. But this young, fit looking guy that you're seeing in the reflection of the fireplace for his whole body and his feet in real time, goes through his little drawers next to his bed, finds the recording from the night before, the guy's in the yard, finds it, grabs it, puts it in his pocket, walks away, and then the camera eventually cuts off. But his motion activated camera under his bed caught the guy walking around in his room, getting the chip from the camera from the yard, putting it in his pocket, turning and walking past the end of the bed. And you just look at that and you go, and then you hear him, you have to turn the volume way up because it's got sound on it too. You turn the volume way up and you hear my guy in his master bed snoring. And these guys were so brazen, the light is on in the room. They actually turn the light on. And you hear him breathing like he's asleep, lightly snoring. I mean, it sounds like he's asleep. When you really turn up, you go, he's clearly asleep. And he was out cold. Now, maybe they had drugged him. Who knows? But he was out cold. But this guy's got the special shoes on. You don't hear him. He goes around. You hear him open the little drawer. You hear put it in the, you can hear light steps. I mean, he's very, very quiet. Puts the thing in his pocket, walks off. But he had told his sister that day that he took the chip out and put it next to his bed. So they were going through the little drawers. And it's like the third or fourth drawer. The guy finds it, puts it in his pocket. And I'm like, oh my God. I said, if you hadn't said that on the phone, you would have had that recording of the thing in your yard. But what we have instead is we have the chip out of the unit under his bed.
Yeah.
Which he'd thrown down there and hadn't turned off, thank God. Anyways, and then there was another guy. So to me, that's just like, really good evidence. And this guy's
Is that available though to the public? Can we see that?
Yeah. I put it online even. I've had it online a bunch.
I'll get that one copy in.
Yeah, I had it on. Anyways, but yeah, I can give you a link to it. And then the other one is a guy who was using motion activated and also just sound activated tape recorder. Has this experience. He's staying, long story short, he's staying at a friend of his house, sleeping on the couch. This guy has a construction business that he does out of his home. He has this bell thing on his front door. So if he's back in a back room, when the construction crew or anyone come in, he hears, it's like a cowbell thing on the front door that goes bing, 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 okay. Pretty loud. Well, this case of mine is sleeping on the guy's couch. He has like a duffel bag next to him, and he has a voice activated tape recorder in it because he was having so many current experiences. He records these guys breaking into the front door, but you hear the cowbell thing, and the door had been locked, but they picked that, whatever. They come in, they're going through his duffel bag, they're moving him around. He's going, can I cuss on your show? Okay, can I? Am I free to? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
He goes, leave me the, I'll clean it up a little. They're moving around, and he's, now they must have drugged him but actually it's more than that. An experience I had where I was taken from a hotel room with a friend where she witnessed part of it. Both her and I remember when the guys came into the hotel room, Amila, there was this clicking sound that we think sends off kind of an EMF or pulse wave that if you're asleep, it keeps you asleep. Because she heard them but remained asleep. Me, they sat me up in bed and kept shaking me to override this clicking device that was keeping us asleep. That's what we think. Okay. And so they were shaking me to get me to stay up. And finally I was like fully awake, but I heard this thing and she heard it, but she was falling back asleep. They didn't take her, they just took me. And I had needle marks and stuff and bruises the next day, and she witnessed all that, and other people too, so that was a big deal. But going back to when this case of mine played this recording of these guys coming in to the front door of the house, coming into where he's asleep on the couch, going through his bag, there's this thing clicking in the background that her and I, because she's heard this, as soon as we heard this, we were like, oh my God, that's exactly what was in our hotel room. So it was keeping him asleep, even though they were moving around in bed. And he's going, and he's saying, leave me the F alone. Leave me the F alone. You can hear him on the recording. Leave me the F alone. And these guys are talking to each other, and they sound like two military guys talking to each other. And they're moving around. And he goes, do you have him? Yeah, I got him, blah, 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 whatever. And then they proceed to carry him out. And you hear him trailing off as they walk away from the recorder, which we think they were looking for, but it was in a little side thing on, so because they were going through his bag, but they didn't find this little voice activated recorder, and they were moving him around, messing with him. And then as they're carrying him away, you hear him go, God damn it, leave me alone, but, and so they removed him, but you hear this and I'm like, you listen to this and you go, clearly those guys are there. Clearly they're going through his stuff. Clearly he's in duress going, leave me alone, leave me alone. I'm going to kill you. My case keeps telling them, I'm going to kill you guys. I'm going to kill you guys. And yet you can tell he's either really drugged or it's clearly half asleep. He's like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you guys. Like that. And both of those. So to me, both of those are really rock solid evidence. I mean, that's like, take it to court. But how do you prove it? You can say, hey, my place was broken into. How do you prove who that was?
Yeah. And especially if you're dealing with the covert arm of the US military or the US government that are all powerful with an unlimited budget and have friends in high places. How far can you take that?
As far as evidence that I've played those for people and they've gone, clearly that is what it is. I mean, it's extremely convincing evidence. So to me, those are two of my favorite pieces of evidence.
Is it through the MyLab work that you end up getting into researching deep underground military bases? Is that where that comes in?
Well, I mean, it's definitely part of it because that's often where you're taken. But no, I didn't get into it that way. Do you want me to switch gears and get into that?
Yeah, let's go for that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Oh, goodness. Yeah, I mean, you guys, the MILAB stuff, I've worked with so many people, so many cases, so much amazing evidence. I mean, people are threatened and warned. People's kids, one lady, as an example, really quick, her daughter has learning disabilities. It's kind of, I don't know, almost mild Down syndrome or whatever. And when she was having stuff happen, they would tell her daughter, tell your mom to remain quiet or something's going to happen to you. I mean, like that's, it's so sick, I mean, to tell your disabled daughter, tell your mom to shut up or, or we're going to, or something will happen to you, like using the daughter as a threat against the mom. I've had other people have that happen. People threaten something's going to happen to their kids. Kids are threatened something will happen to your mom. That's another case I have where the child was told your mom will disappear, I mean, it's, and what's that for? It's to keep you quiet, not saying something. And anyway, so it's pretty difficult. And yet again, it's clearly happening because of the information they're wanting from the abductees. If they think you're a data point, a data source of information, of something they need or want, they'll involve themselves with you. And it could be medical information, it could be psychological, it can be about the ETs, about their technology, about their motives, whatever, but if they think you're going to be a help to them, and then some people, one abductee got, well, more than one, but there's one that comes to mind right away, of a guy who got like recruited into programs and ended up finding himself in a role like perpetrating MILABs and got himself out of it because he didn't want to do that. And it made me, when I've talked to enough insiders, I realized some of these guys are reluctantly in these programs. Now, I also can give you a case or two where the guys like waved almost romantically about the program. So some, they recruit people into these, and sometimes these guys want to be there and they're full on sociopaths, and sometimes they're there very reluctantly and they don't want to do what they're doing. And I've had a few of those. So it told me, just because you're involved in these programs, these legacy programs to any degree, I mean, I'm sure if it's purely just the technology and you're an engineer or physicist, that's got to be the dream job. But even you go back to the Lazar story and you go back to, he was very reluctantly doing some of that. He loved it at first, but then it got bad, and so I have other cases where that's happened, where, maybe they were into it at first and then it got bad. I've had guys break down in tears, for stuff they had to do. One guy made people disappear, said, I've killed people, and he breaking down in tears, like, like he highly regretted that happened to him. And but it told me, there's victims on every level, and what has been done for the level of secrecy in these areas. To say it's criminal and unconstitutional is a complete understatement, not only to the abductees, but to the people in the programs, and to keep a secret for profit reasons, ultimately, and because they think you can't handle the truth, or, it's just, it's insanity. And I'm glad it's changing, it's slowly changing, but it is changing, thank God. And, I've been in the field 35 years. I never dreamt I'd see all this in my life. Thank God I'm around to see it. I feel bad for all the researchers that have passed who didn't get to witness everything going on.
Well, you're deep in the thick of
pick
it,
up
aren't
Jim
you?
Mars and Stanton Friedman and stuff and go, oh man, if they had witnessed this and what they'd be able to say about it and speak to about it. I mean, they just come to mind. I could list others too, but and even John Mack, and you go, God, these people would have so much to say.
Yeah, but people like yourself are carrying on the research. You're researching
That's right.
these deep underground bases right
Yes,
now.
yeah.
This
Oh yeah,
is
that.
forming- Yeah,
That's a good segue, Andy. Yeah.
Yeah, just bringing that back in from that initial question 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so
Okay.
let's get into that. How did you start to research that,
Okay.
and where has your research taken you?
So it was always there that they existed. I had a lecture series in Southern California where I hosted different speakers every month for 10 years and had all the best names in the field. I wasn't a MUFON. It was just called, UFO lecture series, whatever. But I did it for, and it was a labor of love. And I did it, like I said, every month for like 10 years. I had Dr. Richard Sauter, who's kind of the OG, if you will, of underground base research. And I had him come speak for me a number of times. And just recently, because of what I'm doing now, got back in touch with him for many, many years later, because I'd probably gone at least 20 years where I hadn't talked to him. And it was really great that, he's still in there, still doing it, lives in South America. So long story short, so I knew about it because of his research and Bill Hamilton, who's researched it and written about it, as well as Richard Sauter and others. And then in the mill labs, it always came up because that's where a lot of the things were happening. But then when I was coming to Sedona starting in the early 80s, I moved here 14 years ago, Sedona, Arizona, where I'm sitting in my office. And and the map behind me, that's all sightings in the area. Long story short, it would take some explanation, but that's what that is. And I knew about the base here. It was kind of part of the lore. And then when I had a lecture series, I had Tom Dongo come speak for me, who wrote about Bradshaw Ranch, which is our version of Skinwalker Ranch, and the underground base and stuff here, and he had written about that. And so when I had my lecture series and I was living in Southern California before moving here, of course, I had him come speak. And so when I moved here, I established a better friendship with Tom Dongo and met other local researchers. Now I'm part of a research team. There's like 5 of us that are the core members, and then there's like another 10 people helping us that have been tremendous help, and some people that are going to be more help because they've offered help and we just haven't necessarily taken them up on it. But we're this extended group of people researching the underground base here. And again, I was familiar with it from Tom's work over the years. And then when I moved here 14 years ago, I heard a little bit more about it. And then I started to hear accounts of people getting stopped by the guards while hiking and whatnot. Clients of mine who come on my tour were telling me things about getting stopped out while hiking by guards, by guys in either all in black or camouflage with combat boots, Kevlar vests, M16s over their shoulders, who will say, you've entered a restricted area, you have to turn around. Now, there's no signage or anything. And you could say, but I've hiked this trail 100 times. And they'll say, well, not today, you don't. Come back tomorrow. So it means one of the entrances or something is going on. And I had accounts of this, and I started to hear of more accounts of it. And then there was the sightings happening here, the UFO sightings, and what was happening on my tour. We didn't get to that in the beginning when I introduced myself, but I do UFO sighting tours here, and I have for 14 years. I'm now at tour. What am I at? I'm tour 76. Yeah, I think I'm at 1,976. I'm this close to 2,000 tours. The biggest factor not doing it is cloudy skies. I had to cancel last night because it was too cloudy. I hope to do it tonight. I had people roll over from last night and some people already scheduled tonight. So I have a full tour booked. We'll see if I'm able to do it. But going back to, so because of that and the sightings, it became where I was becoming more and more and more aware of the base and activities with it. But then all of a sudden, a year and a half ago on my tours, I can actually tell you when it happened. September 27th, not last year, but the year before. I had my regular UFO tour. I do a lot of talking in the beginning, so all about planes, helicopters, satellites. How do you know if it's commercial, private, or military? With planes and helicopters, and then all about satellites, how you know, and all about drones. I cover all that because you only have a real unknown when you can rule out all the known things. So I cover all that. I do a lot of talking on it in the beginning. And I talk about the kind of things we've seen, what to expect with the military, because we're using military night vision goggles, PVS 7, Generation 3, military night vision, and which increase light by about, they say about 50,000 times. So you see like 50,000 times more stars than you can see with your naked eyes. So stargazing alone is amazing. But then we see real unknowns, things that stop, turn, change direction, fly in formations, etc., etc. And so that tour had started off on the 27th of September, year before last. So I guess 2023, I guess. So it had started off the same way where I did all the explanation. Now I had two families and like a couple, and the two families, I think both of them had like followed my stuff before, had heard me on podcasts and documentaries and TV and maybe lecture or radio show, coast to coast, whatever. Okay, I do all that. And so they were familiar with my stuff, and they said, Melinda, we have some questions to ask you. So, okay, about your own personal experiences and whatnot. And not every tour does. A lot of people are just tourists. They know nothing about me or my background. Very once in a while I get someone that does, and they want to know more. So they were doing that. And I keep it real basic, obviously, you know, for my tours, because I assume people's knowledge is probably not in depth. I love it when someone is more in depth, because I'm able to go further. Like if they're following the current disclosure stuff, I'm able to go more into it. I like that. But anyway, so that night they asked me, and I said, well, wait till after we get some sightings done, because I want to get some sightings under our belt before you ask me. And normally we have the most sightings on my tour in the first hour. It's all about an angle of sunlight, a lot illuminating things in the upper atmosphere. And for instance, that's why you see satellites. Satellites have no lighting on them. You only see them because they're reflecting sunlight. And you're only going to see them in a certain couple hours after sunset and certain hours before sunrise, because it requires that angle of sunlight to illuminate them. But once the sun's on the other side of the planet, I'm doing this, you know, and you're fully in the thickness of Earth's shadow, then there's no lighting to light them up, you know. I've done extensive research. I've taken out many people who work with satellites for a living, and a dear friend of mine owns a satellite company. So I've really made sure I know what I'm saying about it to be as accurate as I can. Anyway, so I explain all that to people. We start the viewing, and I tell them, wait to ask me about my own personal experiences, because the second hour will taper off. As you lose that angle of sunlight, the sightings taper off. So I said, wait. And sure enough, it started to taper off. So that night we would have been done at like 9. Okay, let's just say, well, what would have been 9 that night. And so they didn't start asking me about my own personal experiences till like 8:30. Well, next thing I know, I start storytelling going on, and it ends up being like 9:30. Now, I had covered all about planes and helicopters and all about how you know if it's military. They have a triple blink pattern. And as I'm telling these stories, and we're going on 9:30 now, you know, just because we lost track of the time, one couple, the couple who weren't part of the families, they had to leave. So they did. They left like probably about 9:30, but here we're going past 9:30, and I'm still storytelling. And one guy is looking with the goggles towards the hills beyond us. We go out kind of on a hill in a clearing, the end of town, but we're looking towards the mountains and canyons in the distance. Mostly I tell people, they would always say, what direction do we look, Melinda? What direction do we look? And I would say, look up 10 times more than any other direction. Scan the whole sky constantly for sightings, but it would be times 10 straight up. And so I did that night. We had all the sightings in the first hour, and it really tapered off. That's would be the norm for my tour. And so when it tapered off, they're asking stuff. Like I said, we get past 9. We're supposed to end till like 9:30. This guy's looking towards the hills, and he says, Melinda, there's a lot of military coming over these hills, out over the canyons. Is this normal? So I turn my goggles back on, and I look, and I'm like, oh, hell no. You know, He goes, have you ever seen this? I go, no. Normally in my tours, we would see no military helicopters, and maybe we would see one or two. Now, every city, ever since 9/11 and the Patriot Act here in the U.S., every city has military flyovers, and I'm sure, where do you live?
I'm in the northeast of England, just outside
Okay.
Newcastle. So we
Okay.
get military stuff now and again.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
there's an
yeah.
airport
So
close
they're
by.
probably patrolling for the same reason here. They're
Yeah.
patrolling for terrorists and stuff. Okay. So we're very used on my tour to seeing military patrols, like the flyover, and they're usually very high up, but that's common. But what we usually don't get are a lot of military helicopters. If anything, we get more during the day, but not night, long story short. And the closest, we're saying to everyone, the closest, after extensive research by me and the team, the closest place to have any military jets or helicopters stationed at it, stationed there regularly, is Luke Air Force Base right outside of Phoenix, which is 2 hours away as the crow flies. That's the only place with any military helicopters or jets stationed at it. And then there's a few more a little further away, but that's the closest one currently and for many, many years. And so he says, Melinda, there's a lot of military. Well, I can say now, because this has now happened every night for a year and a half, that it's military helicopters, and they hover and go back and forth. And he said, have you ever seen this? Well, I started to say, normally on my tour, we would see maybe one or none, like, 1 in 10 tours. See one helicopter, maybe two. That was a rare thing at night to see any military helicopters. And here's a sea of them out over those hills and canyons. And there's nothing out there. In fact, okay, so I'll go back to the story. So my other clients start looking with their goggles and they go, is this normal? I go, no, we've never seen this before. And I'd been doing it at that. Now, I used to do my tours at another location in town, but the location where I had them that night, I'd been doing it there for like probably 6 years in a row, and they're going, you've never seen this here. I go, no, never, never seen this. And then all of a sudden we started to have more sightings. Things were popping in the sky, coming down, UFOs, in other words, coming in, and they were going down and going behind the hills. And I should start with, first we had them popping and flying around. My clients were like, is this normal? We didn't see anything for like an hour to all of a sudden have a bunch more sightings. And I went, oh, hell no. Never seen this before. And then they started going behind the hills, mountains in the distance, and coming up behind those mountains. And my clients were like, have you ever seen them go and come behind the hills before? And I went, never seen that here. This is crazy. And my clients were like, well, what's back there? What's on those hills? Well, there's nothing on those hills. There's like 3 or 4 really obscure advanced level hiking trails. In front of those hills, yes, there's canyons with known hiking trails, and there's a resort called Enchantment. But you go on top of those hills, there's like only 3 or 4 really obscure hiking trails. On the other side is nothing. And when I say nothing, there's Secret Canyon with a little bit of a trailhead that goes into it for a ways and eventually ends. And then the rest of it is rocky and tree filled all the way to the back. And then there's, in the other end is Sycamore Canyon. There's a hiking trail that goes back 3 miles and eventually ends. And then there's miles of nothing. And when I say nothing, you look on Google Earth, there's not a building, there's not a structure, there's not even a dirt road. And Sycamore Canyon, you can find on Google Earth these 2 little tire mark lines like an ATV road. Some of my team members a couple months ago went to go back out there and they said, well, it's completely overgrown. So what looks like an ATV road on Google Earth is now overgrown and you'd have to get out and bushwhack to even do it. They tried. They say you can't get very far. So it's become very overgrown. And so you go back and you go, well, there's Secret Mountain. And then there's an area called Secret Mountain Wilderness where Secret Canyon is. And then Sycamore Canyon, which is officially 7 miles long, 3 miles wide. But once you get past the end of the hiking trail, there's like 4 or 5 miles of nothing. And same with the end, couple miles at the end of Secret Canyon. So you add those together and it's roughly at least 8 miles of nothing. And then the closest town is 23 miles back, closest civilization, and that's if you're driving from the town of Flagstaff to Williams, which is how you go to the Grand Canyon. In the middle is this little town called Belmont. That's a McDonald's, I think a Days Inn and a truck stop, and that's it. Like if you're on the 40 freeway going from Flagstaff to Williams, you blink, you'd miss Belmont. That's what's there. And there's a scattering of ranches out in pine forest, and then nothing. So there's like 20 miles that way of nothing by 8 to 10 miles this way of nothing in this big area. And when you look on Google Earth, like I said, there's not even a dirt road. There's no roads, there's nothing. And yet this is where this stuff was coming in and out of. And then so the next night, the 28th, I said to my clients, we need to see if any of this happens again, because something really weird happened for the first time in 13 years, on my tour. And then sure enough, it happened again. In fact, it was even more military coming in. And even more, and these objects that are coming down are big amber lights, but what they are is okay. I've taken out physicists and plasma physicists on my tour. It was mostly, and I've gotten a lot of detail from the physicists and plasma physicists. I've taken out all sorts of highly qualified individuals, insiders, ex-military, ex-intelligence, current military, current intelligence, military pilots, military helicopter pilots, all sorts of commercial airline pilots. I mean, hundreds of these folks. I mean, I've done 1,970 tours, and I'm taking out up to 10 people every time. It's like a lot of people, and I get a lot of highly qualified individuals, people who work with satellites for a living. Lots of intelligence community people, all sorts. Anyway, so, and I always learn from all of them, and so going back to what was I saying? So we're seeing the stuff come and go behind the hills. So the next night I say, you guys, we need to see if this happens again. It happened again, it was more, and then it happened again. And a year and a half later, it's been happening like every night, There's only a few nights where like didn't happen. And the other thing that's happening is out in these areas where there's nothing behind these mountains, we'll see large banks of like lighting come up that I will tell my clients, see how it's all lit up back there? I go, you guys, that's wild, rugged forest. There's nothing back there. The only way you're going to have lighting back there is if you're dropping it in from the sky or bringing it up from underground. And so that's what I tell my clients. I said, what we have back there is a deep underground military base. Of course, the acronym is DUMB. And I said, that's what we have back there. And we now have interviewed a number of insiders, people who've claimed to have worked there, who've shared stuff with us. I have some major media involved in this investigation. I have major academia and science involved in this investigation, major media involved, and significant. And I also have interest, very high level interest, by senators and congressmen in what's going on here. And a lot of people who are saying we're coming out there to see what's going on. The team we found many what we believe are the tunnel locations. One news network came out and did well, I'll start before that. Let me see. A television show which has aired called, you're familiar with the Skinwalker TV show, yes?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And then there was the spinoff called Beyond Skinwalker.
Yes. Where
they've done other properties. Well, out here we have our Sedona's version of Skinwalker Ranch is Bradshaw Ranch. And Brandon Fugel, who owns Skinwalker Ranch, tried to purchase Bradshaw Ranch to maybe do another show, or at least at the very least do an investigation there, because they believe it's very much like Skinwalker. Its own currently was the Bradshaw family, hence its name. It was a cattle ranch once upon a time, and has a long, rich history. And some of the old Hollywood Western movies were all filmed out on that property, so it's very rich history. And it's now owned by the Forest Service and the government. Long story short, Brandon tried to buy it, but the Forest Service won't sell it to him. Well, now I think I know why. Because they came and did 2 whole shows on Beyond Skinwalker about Bradshaw Ranch. They did ground penetrating radar on one of those shows and found a 50-foot wide tunnel going right under the property for thousands of feet, for as far as they scanned, and they knew it went beyond. In fact, when they overlaid the picture on Google Earth, and I've recreated this, I took some screenshots from the TV and then really recreate on Google Earth to show the line. It goes right back into Sycamore Canyon and Secret Canyon on one end, and the other end goes to this cement processing plant. It's a quarry where they dig up the different things, quarry for the makings for cement, gypsum, limestone, etc. And then they grind it down, and it services a lot of various construction companies and building companies all over the country, but it's well known. And it's right below, if anyone's bound to the town of Jerome, right above Clarkdale, you're looking down on the cement processing plant. It kind of looks like a refinery, but it's a cement processing plant. But it's been rumored, and Tom Dongo had interviewed guys who work security out there, who say that in the middle of the night, they have very high level security out there. In the middle of the night, big semi trucks come in and go back to this building in the back of the property and disappear. Well, they probably know, but being that there's security guards out there, they probably can't say what they know, which is there's a false floor or a tunnel entrance. But Tom had interviewed a number of these guys over the years, and residents in the area will say trucks go in and kind of disappear, and occasionally a military convoy of vehicles will head in there. But it's sure enough, this 50-foot wide tunnel, when you extend it, goes straight to a building at the back of that property. I mean, when you go straight, it goes straight to the back of the canyons and straight to a big building at the back of the property, like what looks like a big hangar or warehouse building on the back of the property. So we think that's where the trucks are going in and going down, because it goes straight there. Now, we also have the Drake cement plant in the town of Drake, outside of there, between Drake and Paulden, which we are now fully investigating, which my team members and I have interviewed people who live out in that area, and they say military convoys of 5, 6, 7, 8 military vehicles go in there, and it's a small facility. They go in there and disappear. So they know that that's one of the entrances. And we also have had the sightings that we're seeing at night coming, going behind the canyons are predominantly coming, going from 4 locations. And they all make sense now based upon where we know these major tunnel entrances are. And one of them is that area. So there are times when all the sightings are coming and going right from that area, from the Drake Paulden area. In fact, I had a gentleman on my tour who was a pilot who had a bunch of apps on his phone for flying, and he brought up, and it was like an azimuth thing that showed us. I said, "Tell me where these objects are coming up from. Are they coming up from further? Are they coming up closer? Does your app show the increase in altitude and speed and blah blah blah?" And sure enough, it showed all that. And the next day, it either interfaced with Google Earth or he overlaid it on it, but he sent me all these screenshots the next day of the azimuth and all the technical data on. Again, I think it interfaced with Google Earth. I'd have to ask him, but it clearly showed that these objects were coming up just between Drake and Paulden. He said they're coming up from there. It showed the direction, how much increase in altitude, increase in speed, etc. And he said, do you know any significance to these 2 little towns? He didn't know. I'd never said anything on the tour to this pilot about our research in that area. So he didn't know that was significant. And he said, these are clearly coming up from that area. So that's really great evidence to have that. So every night we've been seeing this stuff come and go behind the hills, and the military helicopters come in. Now I had a lady the end of last year come on my tour. She was in charge. She was the captain of a helicopter unit in the military for what I forget the full extent of how long you can be in, 12 years or something. I think it's 12 years that she did it. And she said she was the captain. They specialized in taking in supplies to like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, areas in the Middle East. And she said, we flew in night vision mode. We had reduced lighting on our helicopters, reduced lighting in the cockpits inside and out. And we flew with the helmets, with the night vision on them and all that. And so she, on my tour, was saying, I kept saying, and had been saying for a year and a half, I said, when we're seeing all the military helicopters, some of them are closer, some of them are further away. And I said they could be as much as 10, 20 miles away, and then some of them much closer, and blah, blah, blah. And the closest ones, because of the distance of the hills to us and the canyons, is in roughly, depending on where you're looking, roughly 5 miles. And she said, Melinda, no, these are all between 5 and 10 miles away. The majority of these helicopters are flying in night vision mode. And she sent me the specs and all this stuff, and went about, me and the other clients that night, informing us that they're flying in night vision mode. And so she's saying they have reduced lighting and they're all flying in night vision mode using night vision goggles, probably. So Sedona and Cottonwood, Clarkdale, even as far as Wes Williams and stuff, aren't seeing a sea of military helicopters in the area. I've been interviewing some people I work with and some other people and clients I've met. There's a housing development on a hill in Clarkdale, and then there's a big trailer park down in like a canyon that's straight out from the entrance of Sycamore Canyon. And we see the helicopters come in there and hover over the entrance of the canyon. And when I have experts and pilots and stuff on my tour, they say clearly they're securing airspace. What are these military helicopters doing? They're making sure no one uninvited is coming into the party. They're securing airspace. But the people who live out there say seas of these helicopters will come over the hill where this big housing tract is, and then this canyon where this big mobile home park is. And they said seas of the helicopters. And I said, tell me what kind you're seeing. And I keep getting reports. Most of the reports are Black Hawk helicopters. But some of the reports are Apaches. So it's mostly it's like 2/3 Black Hawks and 1/3 Apaches, let's say. And coming over their neighborhoods, coming into those canyons. But again, according to all the experts, when I take them out, they're clearly securing airspace. And then going back to the physicists, plasma physicists, I got sidetracked. It happens easily.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah. It's very complicated and layered, so I kind of have to speak in circles. Okay. I have, believe it or not, a full PowerPoint that's very detailed that keeps me, because I lectured recently for MUFON in Tucson and for a big conference in San Francisco. And of course, I'm lecturing. It's a good point to put this in. I'll say it again at the end. I'm lecturing for Contact in the Desert, which is a great big conference in Southern California desert coming up it's like last weekend in May, first weekend in June. And I'm very, very excited. So everyone look up Contact in the Desert online. And Jeremiah, one of my research partners, one of the core team members, him and I are presenting together. And my lectures I just did for MUFON Tucson and for the San Francisco UFO Con, both of those I did by myself. And I have a full 2-hour presentation, very detailed, that I put together. But him and I are going to present together, because so much of what I'm sharing, I say certain things that are clearly his research, his experiences. So I said, that'll be so great when he's able to share his own research experiences and I share mine. So we're going to present together. But going back to, so the plasma physicist, but that's what I'm saying. When I'm speaking in circles, I don't have my PowerPoint to keep me on track. Because normally I'd be very concise and on track to get it all done in 2 hours. But it was mostly the plasma physicists who gave me the most detail. They said in the lab, they create a highly charged energy field, so massively charged. It ionizes the air around it. So just a huge energy field will ionize the air. That ionization glows. The most common color seen in UFO sightings is called amber light. That means anything gold, orange, or red. Okay. The second most common color reported in UFO sightings, and I don't mean in my tours, I mean in 90 years of formal ufology, the most common color reported, amber light. The second is blue, and the third is green. Well, they say in the lab, they create a highly charged energy field, so massively charged, it'll ionize the air. The first thing they get is amber light. They get like gold, more power, it goes orange, more power, it goes red. And then I'm told it's like 50 times more power or something. It goes from red, and then it shifts to a different frequency of plasma, and then you get blue. And another 50 times more power, it shifts frequency again, and then you get the greens. Okay. Well, we used to get on my tours in the 13 previous years, amber light, like 2 out of 3 tours. So we saw it pretty often. That's pretty accurate. 2 out of 3 tours. And sometimes we'd get it once or twice a night. And sometimes the most we got it was like 5 or 6 times in a night. And then there were a lot of nights we didn't get it at all, but that was amber light. And then blue had happened on about 50 tours total over the years, and green had only on 15 tours. By the way, structured craft, structure means you're seeing, all the hard edges on something, right? If you can see the hard edges, you're getting it structure. I always tell my clients, don't expect to see structure, but we have, this gets sound nuts, but in 1,976 tours, we've seen full structure 70 times. 70 full structure craft, including discs, triangles, cylinders, cigar ship cylinders, big boomerang craft, diamond like diamond on a playing card, triangles 10 times, discs 5 times now, full discs, structural sphere, and I don't mean orbs, that's a different phenomenon. I'm talking about structural sphere, like take a cruise ship or motorhome, pack it in a ball. We've seen that 5 times, et cetera, et cetera. Teardrop shape, like I said, diamond shape, boomerang shape, etc. So huge variety. I tell people don't expect that. Yes, we always hope that we have it. Last time we had it was 4 weeks ago, which I can share in just a minute. Amazing sighting. Great sighting 4 weeks ago of a structure craft. But going back to coming right out of the canyon area, by the way. And my team members have. My team members have all seen this. People out hiking and in our canyons witness these things. We get these reports all the time. And so going back to real quick, so the plasma physicists say in the lab they're creating that. So when we get the amber light, that means something is generating such a huge field, like such a huge amount of energy that it's ionizing the air around it. And then I don't know if you know Science Bob McGuire. Everyone calls him Science Bob, but Bob, everybody knows Bob. But one day on the phone, anyways, he said, Melinda, there's another thing that can produce the ionized field besides it bleeding a huge amount of energy. I'm going to quote, the engineers and physicists on my tour called it an obscene amount of power. It's bleeding an obscene amount of power to ionize the air around it, that at any distance of, thousands of feet, let alone miles, that we would see amber light, but we get the gold, orange, red. Now, I used to say we got 2 out of 3 tours. Now, since this new activity, Andy, we're getting it every tour. And I tell my clients, if we had it less than 20 times, I'd be disappointed. We're getting it like 50 to 100 times a night. No joke. These objects are coming in the sky, coming down. They're going behind the hills. They're coming up from behind the hills. They're flanked by a sea of military helicopters. I had another big television network out here taping a show that has not aired yet. Okay. But it will. They assure me it will. It's going through, it's kind of a long story and I don't need to get into it, but they're going through this. But, welcome to doing television, But so they came out and they filmed with me. And one of the producers got back to me. And it was peaking. The activity can peak at different times at night. It was peaking between 1 and 1:30 in the morning. Well, first off, you'll never see satellites at that time because there's no angle of sunlight to illuminate them here in northern Arizona. I'm told, I've done extensive research. You have to be at the equator, looking low to the north, and at the equator on the planet to see satellites in the middle of the night. Otherwise, there are certain windows because of lack of any angle of sunlight, and the only reason you ever see satellites, they're illuminated by the sun, so they have no lighting. It'd be a complete waste of extremely limited energy. So what's great is they were filming, when that's an impossibility, first off, okay, and then we're getting these giant amber lights coming in, which means we're getting the ionized air. And going back to Science Bob, he said there's another thing besides it bleeding a lot of energy that can produce the ionization. And he says that's a huge magnetic field. If they're generating a magnetic field, that will ionize the air. Of course, my response to him is, wouldn't that require an obscene amount of power to be able to do? So either way, it's an obscene amount of power. But whether it's the energy ionizing the air or a magnetic field, otherwise it's a field effect around the craft when you're getting it. So So we're seeing these things glowing in this gold, orange, or red light. We're a little too far away. I tell people don't expect to see structure, but occasionally we do. One night, we're at my regular viewing location. Two of my team members, and I didn't know this till I talked to them the next day, we're out at Bradshaw Ranch, which is 6 miles away from where I'm standing normally with my tours. This just would take too long and too much off-road on dirt roads. I can't take clients out there all the time. Most clients wouldn't want to drive it in their rental cars, et cetera. Okay, so I didn't know that they were out there. We see a giant amber light come up behind this one mountain called Kasner. It comes up behind Kasner, starts coming towards us. And I told my clients, if we were out at Bradshaw Ranch right now, we'd be looking right up at structure. That'd be structure craft right above us. The next day, I tell my team members about it. They said, Melinda, we were there. I go, what do you mean you were there? We were there. I go, this happened at 9:30 at night. They go, we were out there. I go, you were out at Bradshaw at 9:30 last night? They go, yeah. I said, what'd you see? They said, giant amber lights, multiple, because we kept seeing them too, coming up behind Kasner. One came so low right over him. As it got closer, it was a big black triangle with the amber glow around it. Now, from 6 miles away, it was like an inch in size, this big light. It dimmed a little, got a little dimmer, and then winked out, disappeared. They said, Melinda, it came right over him. It dimmed, hovered for a few minutes, or a minute or so, dimmed a little, and shot straight up like a bullet. So, since then, I tell my clients, some of these, and we've seen him shoot up. I mean, we've seen him shoot up like a bullet. And the 70 times we've seen structure craft, the majority of those are shot straight up like a bullet. But every once in a while, they'll be there and just wink out, disappear. Which, whether they're going interdimensional or folding space-time around them, I mean, it's anybody's guess, They're folding space-time, going interdimensional, or they're taking off so fast you don't see them. But we have seen them shoot straight up. In fact, the one 4 weeks ago. But anyways, going back to, and then they were recently hiking, those same team members, back in Secret Canyon, and out of the back of Secret Canyon, coming right over them is a big daytime, big black triangle coming right over. We've had insiders come forward saying we're reverse engineering both triangles and discs at this property, and both are seen. Now, many things and other craft too are seen in the area. I still say the majority of what we're seeing, because you talked about ETs working with us. This base and the insiders coming forward say it's ETs and humans working together. Abductees, MILABs who've been taken to this base say it's ETs and humans working, including myself. I had one such experience. Well, actually, I had two taken to the space. One I have very little memory of, I have bits and pieces, and I have a witness, and it's mostly I'm going by what my witness said. But the other one, I'm taken with a group of people in a mass abduction. They all remember it, and we were taken to this base. But regardless, I've had other MILAB cases who said they've seen ETs and humans, and ranchers in the area. Ranchers out in the surrounding area said they've had military personnel and ETs on their property, and sometimes at the same time. Just to kind of bring this to a close, you can see like we're doing extensive evidence. We have extensive, and the other crew, they said they filmed the military helicopters escorting these big amber objects coming out of the base. They said one of the producers got to me weeks later and said, Melinda, we reviewed the footage. We sat up all night. They were done with me at 2 a.m. I said, did you guys ever sleep? He said, yeah, maybe an hour. He said, they had a crew of 10. He said, the whole crew came in his room, reviewed the footage, and he said, we filmed repeatedly the military helicopters escorting these objects coming and going from behind the hills. And then, like I said, we just have so much evidence about the base, about the location. We're presenting on it at Contact in the Desert in depth. We're giving a 90-minute lecture giving all the basics, and a 90-minute workshop where the insider accounts and the ranchers accounts and the researchers. Jeremiah had a targeted energy weapon give him radiation burns when he got out to one of these locations. And he's seeing a doctor like weekly about this. He's recovering, but he had like blistering on his face. And they said, you had some kind of radiation thing burn you. And it was when he went out to one of these locations. They've had extensive harassment and surveillance while at these locations. You can probably tell looking at me, I'm not a big hiker. I was more, and I need to get back in shape and do more, because they keep going out and hiking things that I've done some stuff with them that's much simpler, so I can do some, but they'll go and do like a 10-mile thing, and that's beyond my ability on really rugged terrain and stuff. But they have come across some amazing things. And like I said, we have extensive evidence, and the insiders again saying it's ETs and humans working together, that there is reverse engineering. I'm of kind of the mind that the majority of what we're seeing come and go from the area as far as sightings is ET in nature. Jeremiah was leaning more towards more of its reverse engineering. He's coming around because it's so much that we're going, Bob McGuire in a phone call once said, how many you seeing in the high point of a night, the high point of activity of stuff over the base area and coming going from that area? I said, in like an hour. He said, in an hour's time when you see the most. I said 50. He said, give me a conservative number, real conservative. I said, conservatively 50 to 100. He said, Melinda, he goes, anything, if any of it's ours, if any of it, anything over 20 means we have an armada and we're planning on something. And there's a long pause on the phone. And I said, then Bob, we have an armada and we're planning on something.